Today on At Your Service, the discussion will be on trauma and how Anne Arundel County Public Schools help our students through them. Stay tuned.
Welcome to At Your Service, and today our show is about trauma planning. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Nick Silvestri from the Office of School Psychology. Welcome, Mr. Silvestri. Thank you for being here today. Can you discuss the role that you have in Anne Arundel County Public Schools in organizing, trauma response or trauma planning?
Sure. As student services representatives, we have a duty to respond to students and to staff when a traumatic event has occurred in their schools. It could, of course, occur in the community, but it has a direct impact or an effect on the schools. So the student services personnel are the school counselors, the pupil personnel workers, the school psychologists, school social workers, and our school nurses. All of us together make up the student services. Our role is to go into the schools, to work with the school's administration, to decide what extent the impact of that traumatic event has caused to the student population, and try to deliver some services to help them get through the initial aspects of the event, and then for some long-range planning as well.
Do you think, I think one of the things, if we can explain to the community, at the school level, at the board level, the amount of collaboration there is with all parties working with the school and the principal and the community. What is your particular role for Anne Arundel County Public Schools with this type of planning? Because you have a particular position, if you'd like to share. And then Christy and I can talk about our involvement and our collaboration with you as well,
Yes.
being student services.
So of all those professionals that I already mentioned, the counselors, the school psychologists, social workers, pupil personnel workers, and nurses, every school in Anne Arundel County has access to most of those professionals every day. School psychologists are not in their one school every day, and not every school has a school social worker, but for the most part there is a student services staff assigned to every school in Anne Arundel County. So if there is a traumatic event, many times those folks already assigned to a particular school will handle that event. When the traumatic event or incident is of a greater proportion, meaning that it has affected a greater part of the community, or we really think there would be a more school-wide impact, frequently the administrator will get in touch with us on the trauma planning committee and ask that we send in additional county-wide student services personnel to help that school, the administration, and the local student services people already assigned to that school. My role is to make that contact with the principals and with the student services people on the county-wide team. The way we presently have it set up, there are 12 high schools in our school system, so we have 12 county-wide trauma teams. And we would contact, I would contact the people on that team to alert them that an event has occurred at a certain school and they would be expected to be there.
Gotcha. And that's how we, for the audience, we also work with you. I'm the school counselor trauma lead, and Christy is the PPW lead. So there's a lot of collaboration, in acting if we needed a trauma team to go out to work with the school at the school level.
Right.
So it's that whole collaborative piece for response. So everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. So when something comes in, you obviously would contact me, you contact her, and then we then contact other PPW.
And our colleague in the school
counselors.
nursing division also, with the school health. Yeah. And of course, it's not to say that the people we're contacting don't have other duties that they're doing during that time anyway.
Right.
So we would call them and say, you need to sort of downplay those duties for this time frame and meet us
Yeah.
at the school where the trauma is taking effect. And so as a countywide team, we do come in, we provide the additional support, but then when it looks like the school can handle the event on their own, we will send our trauma countywide folks back to their schools,
Right.
to their own assignments where they would have been that day anyway.
Right,
Exactly.
exactly, yeah. So what is a trauma really?
Trauma is usually
Yeah.
defined as an event which causes a great deal of interruption in our lives. So trauma could be a weather-related event, such as a tornado
Yep.
or a flood. Trauma could be unfortunate loss of a person, either a very important faculty member or staff member at the school, or a student at the school. It could involve death. It could involve serious injury if there was an accident, a car accident, and so on. So trauma is the event. What we as trauma planners try to address is the aftermath or the impact of that event. So we're not first responders in the sense of going to the injured victim and applying first aid or some
Right.
type of medical help, but we are there for the impact that that trauma, that loss, that weather event may have had on the community at large.
Right.
And the schools. So we're looking at how it impacts within the school environment. And sometimes it leaks, it can spread out into multiple schools. You could have multiple schools involved with one event if there's siblings or parents that work in a particular building. So it's really important that we gather, we talk about gathering our data to find out the pieces related to that event. And that's, is the key. to have
Well, that picks up on what you mentioned earlier, Susan, about the collaboration. So yes, from our database, we can find out where other siblings of a student, let's just say it was the passing of a student that is the trauma event. We can find out what other schools their siblings may attend. And in today's world with modern social media and technology, word travels very, very quickly.
Yes.
So there could be events in other schools. Let's just say the person who passed away was a member of a sports team, a lacrosse
Correct.
player.
Yeah.
That's a very close community, not depending on what school you attend. Many lacrosse players, both male and female, have very close connections with friends in other schools as well. So it's kind of necessary that we be mindful of that and then alert those other schools that there could be some reaction that maybe they weren't quite ready for because they didn't know the connection. So our collaboration is very, very important with our colleagues in those schools, the student services colleagues, but that's also to find out where else there might need to be some other focus of our trauma planning attention.
I agree. And it's interesting because when do you decide to call in a team from the county level, and then when do you let the school, just use their student service staff? But would it really just, I think about it, just being, it's the impact that that event would have. And so you might have a death of a student where the school and the principal would talk to the teachers and feel like you're going to have a lot of students impacted, where sometimes if it's a student that had just moved into the community and there was an accident, and it's just that they might not have the history. So there might be just a few students that are impacted. So it just really is dependent upon the school and the information that the school is giving us and how they would like us to respond. I don't know.
Each situation is different for sure. And we certainly depend on the principals to be the most well-informed of the community in his or her school attendance area. And those very points that you mentioned will help that principal to decide, can I handle the situation, the impact with the student services staff that is just normally assigned to my school, or will I need to ask for the additional services of the countywide team?
Right, and I think that one of the questions we're going to ask is, why do we have a countywide team? But I think some of that revolves around, the impact and how much help that the school staff might need in just organizing and planning, depending on how they're affected. You know, sometimes I have a conversation with school counselors, if that was their student that they've been working with, are you able to perform your duties? Because they might also be grieving, you know, a death of their student or a death of a colleague. So, you know, many times I feel like that's why we also go in to help support them, because they're not able to, you know, perform that function at that time.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think, you know, in addition to us talking about the professions we represent, psychology and pupil personnel worker and social work and counseling, we're all people before we become professionals. And the exact example you gave, where somebody who's worked very closely with a student and all of a sudden that student had a tragic death, we certainly would expect our colleagues to be having a reaction of grief and remorse, and certainly not being able, as you say, to really do the full function of their job that they would normally be able to do otherwise. So having a backup team, and that's essentially what the countywide team is. They're backups, and we've designed it so that all the people on the countywide team that's assigned to a particular cluster do not work in that cluster on a regular work week. So that sort of keeps that distance a little bit better, and they're able to be, let's just say, more objective and more able to come in and do the job that needs to be done.
I agree. I think that's really vital. You know, to have a little bit of separation within the community and the schools that you work.
And sometimes you don't know, excuse me, what it's going to be like until you're there. Sometimes you think it's going to be very little impact, and it turns out to be quite a large impact as well.
And so let's talk a little bit about the traumas, because I think that we have some common traumas. You know, student death, faculty death. Some of them are, you know, accidental, and then some could be a long-term illness. Are there different ways that, you know, that the county plans for an accidental death over something that's been a long-term illness?
Yes, certainly if we're aware that a student or a faculty member has a terminal illness and that their death is imminent, because the obvious conclusion of that terminal illness will be the passing of that student or of that faculty member, we can certainly do some preliminary work with the school's administration and with the student services staff there to basically prepare a little bit in advance of the passing. It's the accidental ones or the tragic ones that just happen without any notice that certainly, obviously, we can't plan too well for, because we wouldn't be able to plan for that specific event. But we do a lot of training with our response team members in general terms to be prepared for such an event, even though not the specific one. So people know that if they've agreed to be on the trauma teams, the countywide teams, they would have to drop what they're doing that day at their job and go to the site where they've been asked to report that day. So there is that level of preparedness and training and just being able to see what needs to be done that day when you arrive. And you're right, Christy. I mean, sometimes to the principal's best judgment, there may have been a decision, oh, this probably won't involve too many students. And then, to our surprise, a number of students are referring themselves to the counseling office. So we do have the capacity, if that happens, to call some additional people to come to the school. So whenever you see in the newspaper or on the report that counselors and school psychologists are available, it's referring to that team of student services personnel who have been trained and are essentially on alert that at some point you might be called upon to respond to a school for a trauma event. So we try to plan, indeed, the ones that we know are coming because of an illness, let's say. They give us a little more time, but many times we're taken by complete surprise.
Yeah, you just have to be flexible, right? Definitely. And we'll be back soon right after this message.
Hi, I'm Jody Rissi, the host for Food for Thought. Later today, I'm joined by Dr. Katie Wilson from the United States Department of Agriculture. Dr. Wilson, how important are nutrition programs to the students across the country?
School nutrition programs are really the best safety net this country has to offer. Those programs decrease food insecurity, decrease hunger, but increase the nutritional quality of the kinds of foods that students consume in a day. That leads to wellness, which leads to better work in the classroom and productive citizens in your community.
To watch the full interview, join me later today on Food for Thought.
Welcome back to our show. If you could answer some more questions about trauma, we'd appreciate that. Could you tell us what the main focus is when the trauma team goes into the school building? What exactly do we do?
Okay. So we've already mentioned who we are, the professionals in the Student Services Division. And our primary focus when we enter a school that has asked for some additional support is to provide counseling to the students. Okay. We might meet with groups of students who are having a difficult time with the death of, let's say, a faculty member or another student. We might meet students on an individual basis and do counseling with them. For many of our students, this may be the first time that they've actually encountered death. Yep. And certainly for those who were closer in a relationship with the deceased staff member or fellow student, their reaction to their grief would certainly be more serious or more acute. Those who were aware of the student and maybe friendly on a casual basis, they would benefit maybe from a group experience where they're with others. Right. Certainly for some, the experience is so devastating that it's worth a phone call to the family and to explain at that time that your student, your son or daughter is having a difficult time and really needs you to come here and pick them up to take them home. What we also do as a service is come up with some handouts that we share with the principal, and many times these go home with the students or are posted on the school's website. And these are topics of how to talk with your children about grief and how to deal with death of a close family member or death of a staff. So it's with that information that we see ourselves as student services representatives of providing some resources to parents. Okay. But our primary service is to the students because we wish to provide counseling and grief reaction. If indeed, as I say, the student's reaction is to such an extent that they just will not benefit by staying in school that day, we ask parents to come pick them up and take them home for the day.
Okay. Yep, and that's important. You know, it's important when the school counselors, school psychologists are working with the students that they assess the students. So the students that keep coming back down from the classroom, that's the challenge for them because you know you don't know if it's their first experience, and developmentally it depends. Elementary, middle, and high school, a wide range of responses and experiences.
And developmentally, their needs are so different.
Yes.
And so how you would work with them would be very different, you know.
I think one constant, though, among all of the age differences would be when either the school-based student services staff or us from the countywide staff make contact with a student either in direct individual counseling or group, we do follow up with a call to the parent and let them know that their student did come in for some support today, because we certainly want to not only empower the parent but give the parent some knowledge base on what they could say. And as we know, many times on a personal level, families will deal with these issues of death and loss in a religious sense. So that's not something we in the school system would necessarily bring up or discuss unless a student did. But that's what the family needs to do when the student comes home.
There needs to be a conversation when they go at home.
Absolutely.
A check-in. You know, what's going on, how are you feeling, and then really supporting, and parents are great with that, you know, but it's our responsibility. Either the team can call or the student services staff at the school can call. So we always have lists that we have kids write their names on, so we're able to follow up.
Yes.
some way, shape, or form. And that kind of leads me into another situation, well, an aspect of the trauma team, the types of trauma, okay? So we're going to talk about the difference between an accident and a suicide, because I think there's perceptions that, you know, that we have the ability to do certain things as a school system that we're really not able to do. Can you talk about the nature and how we approach, I would say, a student who has committed suicide compared to an accident?
Yes. Well, as much as we in the Student Services Division, who deal primarily with mental health, as much as we would like to think that mental health is now a topic we can discuss freely in our society, there certainly is a taboo, unfortunately, and a stigma that goes along with someone that we think might have a mental health issue or a mental illness. That's not to say that only those with mental illness will take their own lives, but we have found statistically that many students who consider that do have the makings of perhaps a depression or some other emotional difficulty that they're dealing with. So the responsibility for us is to make it clear only the information that is factually known. We've already talked a little bit about social media, and people really speak their minds and share their opinions very easily on social media. The school system is not in a position to do that. We don't have opinions. We don't base any of our statements only on opinions. We only can work with facts. And we work very closely with the family who has the deceased child, our student, whether the student is death because of accidental causes or, as we're saying in this discussion, because they took their own lives. And we want to be sensitive to the fact that the parents want to deal with this in their own way. So we reveal information in the counseling sessions that we've been talking about based on those two basic ideas, that it's only factually true and that it is pretty much what the family has authorized us to say at that moment in time. Now, many of these trauma events develop very quickly, more and more. And as the family deals a little bit more with their loss, they might say, it's okay with us if you now tell the students for counseling that my child took their own life. But that's not something we take very lightly. So, and we always need to be aware that adolescents in particular are very subjectable to other people's opinions and thoughts and discussions. So we constantly monitor, and that's another reason why we call home after we have seen students. We want parents to know that their own child is hurting, and sometimes the hurt is directly related to the trauma event that we're there for, and sometimes it's because they remember maybe the passing of their grandparent or somebody else that was very close to them. Only the family would know that really well, and that's why we really want the family to work very closely when we call to say their students have come down for counseling that particular day.
So, you know, just going back to what you said, many times it appears that, you know, the school system's not doing enough, but really we are respecting the wishes of a family who have just lost a child by any way, you know, whether it's accident or you know, suicide, and that is our role because that is their child. And so we really do take the lead. They take the lead, and then we're able to follow with that factual information. But I want to make that really clear because I think sometimes that people don't understand that that's a huge piece of what we have to work with.
The other side of that is we really don't want to mention the hearsay or the opinion. It's not that we would say to a student, oh, that's not true. We don't want to put ourselves in a position of even repeating opinion or hearsay because that's we're essentially a government agency, and what we say becomes the authoritative statement. So we really want to be very factual and, as you're saying, very sensitive to the impacted families.
Definitely. 100%.
What are some other agencies that are that we collaborate with?
We are very fortunate here in Anne Arundel County that we have really a very good collaborative relationship with many of the mental health providers in the community and with many of the faith-based organizations as well. This issue of death and particularly, death by accident or death by suicide, we really do require the services of outside professionals as well. The Anne Arundel County Warm Line, which is also referred to as the Mobile Crisis Unit, is a superb response. And many times, because they are monitoring the police band radio, they are the first responders many times who go to a tragic incident. So yes, they do have mental health providers, but working in tandem with the emergency management crews, the police department, the fire department, they many times are on the scene of a tragic fire or a tragic accident. So not only are they able to see what happened factually and see the event, but they too can assess for us the need that maybe these kids coming back to school or the neighborhood was there when the house was on fire, and they could give us that information. So we work very closely with the Anne Arundel County Mobile Crisis Unit. And as I mentioned, we work very closely with many of the ministers and those with the different faith-based organizations in our county as well, because we've already spoken to the spiritual, the religious component, and many times the churches or the synagogues or the mosques will get in touch with us as well and help us to assess what the needs could be. Certain things we can easily address, and other things we turn back over to the faith-based leaders and have them take over from there.
We also collaborate with for our employees too, especially like if we have a loss of a teacher. We have support for them as well, which is good.
We do. A few years ago, the school system purchased services for an employee assistance program, an EAP. Many businesses have these. Probably many of the parents watching this program will have that through their own employer, which is a very good acknowledgement that if you want a productive worker, you really need to address their other needs as well, whether they be financial or mental health and so on. So we do have a very close relationship with our EAP, and we'll frequently call them to come to the event that we've been describing, a trauma event in the school, because, in using your example earlier, Susan, a counselor or a teacher may have had a particularly close relationship with the deceased, and our EAP person can really work with those staff members. Most of us in student services work and we're certified by the State Department of Education to work with children. So much of the adult work in these examples is done by our EAP.
And that's important because, for people that are watching in the community, our certification is to work with kids. We might have other credentials outside, but our major role is to serve students. Even though we do provide resources and, support, one of our supports now for staff is to, let them know about the employee assistance program, which, is a fantastic opportunity it's not just for counseling, but they have quite a variety of benefits. And I think that's, it's critical. But I just wanted to thank you today for joining us to help inform and clarify the roles for the school system in dealing with trauma planning and how we are trying to support our community. And I would like to thank our viewers today. Join us next time at Your Service.